The silent drift. Why 70% of modern relationships fail, and how to stop it. Introduction. The painful cliche of the silent drift. Welcome to the podcast. Today we are talking about a pattern that has become a devastating, painful cliche, one that drives a staggering statistic. Women initiate about 70% of all divorces. This is not an accident, and it is not because women are inherently fickle. It is the symptom of a deeper, systemic breakdown in how we understand and perform our roles in modern partnerships. The pattern is often called the silent drift. A relationship that once felt vibrant and connected slowly cools. One partner, typically the man, grows more distant, quiet, and withdrawn, retreating into work, hobbies, or silence. The other partner, typically the woman, feels an exhausting sense of invisibility. Her bids for connection are met with avoidance, and her expressions of anxiety are dismissed, until one day she simply stops trying. The emotional well runs dry, and she gives up. We are told this is a failure of communication or a lack of love, but that is wrong. The true reasons are rooted in destructive cultural scripts we have inherited and a profound misunderstanding of what genuine emotional connection requires. Today, we are going to expose the hidden mechanics that are actually at play. We will uncover 4 counterintuitive truths that drive this silent drift, and we will reveal how we can consciously dismantle these broken scripts to build a foundation of true emotional strength. Part 1. The myth of the Stoic Man and the roots of emotional suppression. To understand the problem, we have to start at the beginning, with the toxic, destructive role we ask men to play. We are culturally conditioned to see the Stoic man, emotionless, silent, tough, and self-contained, as the timeless archetype of masculine strength. This ideal is not only fictional, but it is the unintentional starting pistol for the entire relationship breakdown. Truth number 1. The Stoic Man isn't an ideal, it's a destructive modern myth. The modern caricature of the Stoic man has almost nothing to do with the ancient philosophy of Stoicism. Ancient Stoicism, as taught by figures like Marcus Aurelius, was about rational emotional regulation. It was not about suppressing feelings. It was about accepting what you could not control, like external events, and focusing only on what you could control, your own judgments and reactions. It promoted inner stability and resilience. The modern misinterpretation is a distortion. It confuses inner calm with emotional denial, making it a tool for avoidance rather than a philosophy for wisdom. A brief history of a toxic script. This destructive script is not an ancient truth. It is a modern trap, largely a product of the Victorian era and the Industrial Revolution. The separate spheres. Industrialization created a sharp division of labor. The man was pushed into the public sphere of work, where he was expected to be rational, competitive, and unemotional. Emotional expression was seen as a weakness that compromised his ability to provide. The emotional manager, the woman, was confined to the private sphere of the home, where she was designated the moral and emotional manager. It was her duty to provide an emotional sanctuary, absorbing her own feelings and those of her family to maintain harmony. The impossible contract. This separation led to an impossible emotional contract. The man was culturally forbidden from expressing his own inner turmoil, and the woman was burdened with managing the emotional stability of the entire household. In short, the man's attempt to be a stable provider, rooted in this toxic script, directly creates the emotional vacuum in the relationship that starts the negative cycle. His emotional suppression becomes his proactive compartmentalization, a learned coping strategy to avoid stress by filing thoughts away. But this silence, meant to create stability, actually triggers the entire system failure. Part 2. Psychological debt and the emotional tax. When the man retreats into his proactive silence, he creates an emotional vacuum. This vacuum is immediately filled by a destructive engine that we call psychological debt. Truth number 2. The unfairness is a real imbalance of emotional energy. The core of this problem is the emotional nurturer trap. It is an invisible but deeply felt imbalance that creates an unsustainable asymmetry of energy exchange that damages both partners. Here is how the dynamic functions. For her, anxiety is an energy release. She is socially permitted to express her anxiety as a release, often seen as part of her role as the relationship's emotional manager. For him, her anxiety is an energy demand. He is culturally expected to absorb her distress and provide a stable anchor, solving the problem without showing his own emotional turmoil. The trap. His own anxiety is a drain that he is expected to suppress. If he expresses vulnerability, it is seen as a failure of his duty to be the strong provider, which increases her anxiety and deepens his psychological debt. This is where the emotional tax comes in. This tax is the result of unacknowledged, passive, emotional burden. It is what happens when someone attempts to fulfill a need for their partner but does so while covertly outsourcing their own unmanaged emotional state. For example, a woman may ask her partner for help with a stressful task, like driving her to a difficult appointment. The covert contract is, "I am providing you with stability." But because the man's anxiety is suppressed, it is instead silently expressed through tension, passive-aggressive comments, or clear discomfort. The woman, the designated emotional manager, not only has to deal with her original anxiety, but now also his unacknowledged, unspoken anxiety, effectively dealing with double the emotional load. This non-reciprocity is a massive psychological tax. And here is the problem for the man. Because his expectation was unspoken, a covert contract, he grows deeply resentful when the unsaid favor or connection is not returned. This chronic asymmetry is what generates relational exhaustion. She feels her needs are never truly met, while he feels silently crushed under a weight he can neither share nor set down. This imbalance immediately triggers the classic demand-withdraw cycle. She demands, she pursues connection to feel secure and attempts to share the emotional load. He withdraws. He perceives her pursuit as a threat or demand on his suppressed emotional energy and retreats further to manage his stress. His silence confirms her deepest fear, that she is alone in maintaining the relationship's health, which accelerates the accumulation of her psychological debt. Part 3. Her withdrawal is not the attack. It's the end. This brings us to the moment where the relationship officially enters its final stage, her emotional withdrawal. When this happens, it is often perceived as the cold, deliberate act that initiates the breakdown. Truth number 3, her emotional withdrawal isn't the start of the problem, it's the tragic conclusion. In reality, her withdrawal is the tragic conclusion to a long, exhausting battle. Unlike the man's proactive compartmentalization, the woman's emotional withdrawal is reactive. It is a terminal defense mechanism for self-preservation. It is the activation of the emotional compartment, a psychological fortress that only engages after a long period of chronic emotional depletion. The brain builds this compartment to conserve energy and to prevent psychological collapse. She does not withdraw as a first resort. She withdraws after repeated, failed attempts to connect have depleted her emotional resources. Her brain concludes the relationship is an unsafe place for her needs and initiates a shutdown to conserve what little energy she has left. Crucially, this withdrawal is often enabled by a second phenomenon, the sanctuary effect. Truth number 4. Her friends can paradoxically make the breakup inevitable. A woman's strong social network is a vital asset, but in a struggling marriage, it becomes an emotional sanctuary. Once she determines her primary relationship is no longer a safe place for connection and is instead a source of mounting psychological debt, her strong external support system allows her to divert those essential needs outside the marriage. She achieves a stable emotional equilibrium without her partner. This is why the final split can seem so decisive on her part. Her external support system has enabled her to emotionally leave the relationship long before she physically departs, and it explains why the man, who often relies solely on his partner for emotional support, can be left so vulnerable and blindsided. He loses his entire support system while she has already transferred hers elsewhere. Her withdrawal is not a malicious first move in a conflict. It is the final, heartbreaking response of a system that has been chronically depleted. It is the end of the process, not the beginning. Part 4. The Lie of Just Be Vulnerable. So, if the man's emotional suppression is the starting pistol and the woman's exhaustion is the finish line, what is the solution? The common advice is to be more vulnerable. But this advice often backfires. If done incorrectly, attempting to be vulnerable can create more chaos and push your partner further away, reinforcing the very dynamic you are trying to fix. The truth: vulnerability isn't emotional vomiting, it's leadership. For a man conditioned into stoicism, simply telling him to be vulnerable is a trap. Without a proper model, his attempts often manifest in ways that increase his partner's emotional burden, accelerating her withdrawal. Unmanaged anxiety and emotional dumping are repulsive. Healthy vulnerability creates emotional safety. Here are the most common mistakes people make when trying to be vulnerable: emotional vomiting, not vulnerability. Sharing a deep, unmanaged feeling and then demanding your partner immediately comfort you or agree with you is not vulnerability. It is emotional vomiting. It is a transaction. True vulnerability is a gift you offer, not a tool to extract validation. This pressure sets your partner up to fail, not taking responsibility. The covert contract trap. Talking about your past pain without owning your contribution to the current dynamic sounds like victimhood. If your attempt at sharing your emotional state results in your partner taking on a new emotional burden, a psychological tax, you have created a covert contract, not a connection. You are simply outsourcing the processing of your feelings, assigning her the role of the problem solver and the emotional manager. Using it to avoid action, sharing a fear or a problem without any intention of working on it, is not productive. Saying, "I am scared of commitment," but then doing nothing to address that fear, reinforces the very dynamic of invisible labor that led to her exhaustion. The correct approach is to pair vulnerability with self-leadership. True vulnerability requires self-awareness, knowing why you are sharing and what you need. Ownership, using "I feel" statements that take responsibility for your inner world. Commitment to action, sharing with an intention to grow and address the issue yourself. It is about taking responsibility for your emotional state first, which is the foundation of genuine connection. Conclusion: reclaiming your role. The silent drift that ends 70% of relationships is not inevitable. It is the result of following broken cultural scripts that push women toward burnout and men toward isolation. The way forward is to consciously dismantle these roles. You must take radical responsibility for your own emotional state, becoming a stable anchor for yourself before you can be one for anyone else. This means, for men, reject the modern, toxic, stoic myth and embrace emotional self-leadership, ensuring your attempts to connect reduce your partner's emotional load, not increase her psychological tax. And for women, understand that your withdrawal is a final defense, and the only way to re-engage safely is if you see your partner leading with true, responsible vulnerability. This is how you stop the drift and begin building a partnership on a foundation of mutual respect, shared emotional labor, and true strength. What would change in your relationship if you stopped waiting for your partner to fix the emotional dynamic and started leading with self-awareness and accountability?